One, two, three. Okay, so welcome to the show.
Sorry.
Here we are. I'm here with Carl Bonner.
Hi, Ben.
Hi, Carl.
Yeah, that was a weird little pre-roll banter that I don't know if anyone's going to be able to hear that, and
I don't think so. I don't think so.
For the listeners out there, this the omission of our banter is for your own IQ retention.
Yes,
we don't get dumber from listening to it.
Yeah. We want people to stay smart, and and all that stuff. And don't do drugs. Yeah,
don't do drugs. So one of the things that you do when you do stay smart is you make good decisions about your music, and you make good decisions about whether or not you feel like a song is actually done. Right? That was a pretty shoehorned transition into that.
That was amazing. Well, to be honest, it's a very difficult dilemma to know if the song is done or not. I think for most people, we could talk about it in the context of the mix, and we could also talk about it in the context of the production. And I had an interesting discussion also with my studio mate here about mastering, and like when you know the master's good also, and you compare it to your mix. And do you know it's done? So these are all like interesting places, the different stages of the production process. But to know if something is done or not, I don't know if we should start with the mastering stage.
Yeah. Let's start with the mastering
and then move backwards.
Yeah, let's start with mastering and work backwards because I think
because we're weird.
No, I don't think so, because I think we want to look at this as it's not just is the song done, right? It's not just making the decision of is the whole thing 100% ready to send off, but there's also all of these little mini decisions that we make along the way. Like, are we done with fixing the vocal tuning? Are we done getting the rhythm section to feel really good? Are we done? Are we done tracking guitar takes? We make that decision. We have that decision process. We're faced with that conundrum many times throughout the process.
That's true.
I think when most people think about deciding if something is finished or not, they usually think very black and white and like, oh no, it's like the whole song itself, the whole thing is finished. So let's start there and then kind of work our way backwards and just see where it goes.
Cool. So I'll continue my story time with Ben.
Well, you're starting it. You're not continuing it.
Well, yeah, we're starting my story time with Ben. So my studio mate was telling me like, hey, he got these masters back and he isn't sure if he likes it. And he's not sure, like, can I like communicate with the mastering engineer that maybe there could be things done differently? And I was listening to the mix and the master, and I was saying like, well, you could change some of the things that you're in the master for sure, but also you could change some things in the mix. And then the master, you could like adjust the mix for the master. And like, it's just like confusing because I mean, I was sort of telling him at a certain point, you just like get a master back and you move on with your day. But when you're closer towards the beginning of your journey, you hyperanalyze the shit out of those masters. Because believe me, I did. I literally read Bob Katz's book on mastering after I got masters back from my first record. I couldn't handle the mastering, so I read an entire nerdy book about it. Yeah, go on.
I mean, especially the first time that you hire a mastering engineer, or like the artist you're working with hires a mastering engineer, you've heard your own version dozens or hundreds or thousands of times, especially in the beginning. You probably listened to it way too many times.
Yes.
So, and then you compare it to something that you hear once. And whether it's good or bad, it's different and it's going to be jarring. So I think that's probably an element too that you develop is, part of deciding something is done is deciding if it's something that is objectively where you want it versus subjectively unfamiliar.
No, like, yeah, if you're not familiar with the way a master sounds, it could totally throw you off. I think at this stage, I just try to listen to a master once without referencing the mix at all. I might later reference the mix and just see like, oh, what did the mastering engineer do in comparison to the mix? But now I get a master back and I just like listen to it and like, do I feel better with myself? Do I feel better with how the song feels, or am I happy with it, or is it like as moving as the mix was to me?
Yeah.
If not more, and if not, why not? And then well, I usually communicate with my mastering engineer about this stuff. Some people are afraid to, but you definitely, I think most mastering engineers are communicable with. Um, and then, and also like it's like a learning lesson also when you're getting started, the beginning of, talking to the mastering engineer and trying to like get the happy medium where like the song feels, like it feels more full, more correct, quote unquote, but also the mastering engineer is retaining what you loved about the mix. And that is very confusing for, when you're at the beginning of your journey. But you do have permission. You have permission to talk to your mastering engineer and say like, hey, like this is sort of what I was envisioning. Do you think like we can make adjustments here? And I think that's totally legit, and everyone should feel comfortable doing that.
Yeah. I want to take a step back and talk about the idea of, like you were saying, how you used to, compare your mix to the master, and then now you just listen to the master, and like if it feels great, great, and if it doesn't, then we figure it out.
Right.
And I think what that comes down to in the beginning, when we do A/B it over and over and over again and like hyperanalyze it, I think that's just an expression of our insecurity, because I think it's the ego getting in the way as well. Whereas like, well, it's different than my mix.
Yes.
It's different than how I had it in mind. Whether or not it's better, or whether or not, and when I say better, I don't mean like that there's some objective better sounding thing or worse sounding thing, but it's if it's closer to the original vision or not. It's almost like we don't even pay attention to that. We just listen to, oh, well, I liked how bright my mix was, even though maybe it was way too harsh. And I think I'm very similar to you, where it's like when I get the master back, I'll listen to the master by itself, and if it feels great, hell yeah, I have no reason to compare it to my old one. But if something like just isn't quite feeling right, and I can't put my finger on it, then I'll go back and I'll compare it, but not to try to see which one's better, but just more to kind of analyze and
right. And then you could like sort of
troubleshoot, try to figure out, well, what's different about this new mix that isn't quite feeling right compared to the old mix. And like, okay, there's 9 things that I think feel a lot better, and there's one thing that's maybe not. Maybe it's the shape of the lower mids, maybe it's the dynamics, maybe it's the transient control, whatever that is.
exactly.
But I'm looking at it as like a diagnostic. I'm comparing them for like diagnostic information, not trying to make sure that it's the same as mine.
Yeah, not to make sure it's like, oh, is the master actually better? No, it's like, oh, this is what the mastering engineer did. Okay, the mastering engineer thought it was too dull, so they brightened it up. Mm-hmm. But now I'm hearing a lot of spittiness and sibilance I didn't want to hear. So could we find a happy medium? And then you could go back to your conversation with your mastering engineer and get to where all parties are happy, or just like split the difference. That often happens. Because like, oh, there's a reason why the mastering engineer brightened it up. It's just now you've lost that element of your mix that you really loved. And also, I think when I listen to a master, or like when a mixing engineer listens to a master, you're often paying attention to the individual instruments. Like I worked so hard to get this guitar tone. Mastering engineer is not listening to just your guitar tone. He or she is listening to the entire gestalt of the mix. So they are not focused on those instruments. And so sometimes actually individual instruments do get like compromised in order to get a overall feeling that works better. And so you as the mixing engineer, if you have a choice in this matter, because you don't always, get a chance to say, hey, like, I really like what you did there. And now like it feels more full in the low mids, but now the pianos feel a little bit more mushy or whatever it is, I don't know.
And big shout out to friend of the show, Nicholas DiLorenzo, because I feel like working with him over the years, he was always really good at, giving feedback about those things. And if I had questions, or if the artist had, certain requests, he was really good at being able to say, oh, easy peasy, let me, make a tweak and then reprint that. Or these 2 things I can do in the master, but this thing, Carl, if you could, put, a low shelf on the kick drum to bring it down by, 0.4 dB, whatever, the super nerdy stuff that Nick does. He'd be able to say like, oh no, this is something that I can do in the master, or no, this is something that we should do in the mix stage. And as a mixing engineer, I want to make sure that I'm always open to that kind of feedback and knowing that, if there's something that I can do to make it better and easier for the mastering engineer, like, yeah, of course I'm going to do that. Why would I not do that? I don't ever want to have any sort of preciousness or that ego about my mix and that like, no, mine's right. Fuck you, fix it, figure it out,
Yeah.
That just, there are plenty of people with that attitude. And I don't know, that just, the kind of combativeness and isolation, just, it bums me out to even think about having that kind of approach.
Yeah, no, that's really rough. But it's often in the gray, I feel like often the mastering engineer is trying to deal with an issue in the mix that could be resolved in the mix, but there just isn't time. And maybe like you still have to like split the difference. You know what I mean? Like, so it's not always so simple. Not all projects have enough time for the mixing engineer to keep tweaking based on the master, which is awesome. And I've done that so many times. And I love that. Like what you did with Nick and what I've done several times with Connor and whatnot. So it's, it's not always possible. So then you have to just kind of say, okay, let's do the best we can given the situation. And but usually these are like mixing engineer problems and the artist is happy either way at that stage of the process. So Carl, if we can like put a ribbon on the mastering stage, how do we know it's done?
I used to say when I don't notice anything, like when I don't notice anything that I want to fix, right? I think that's kind of like the first, like level 1, listening to a master and approving it. But now I think it's like I put it on in the background. I put it on while I'm driving. I put it on while I'm doing dishes. I put it on while I'm, changing a diaper or something. And then if I don't notice anything, it's done. You know what I mean? Like, I want to try to listen. I need to try to force myself to listen to it like a listener, not like a hyper fixated super nerd that has an exponentially more, like an exponentially disproportionate familiarity with what the mix sounded like that nobody else in the world is ever going to know or hear. So I just want to make sure that it feels good and that like, yeah. Does that make sense?
Totally. I was going to say the same thing. Just like it feels good.
Yeah. There's the car test. There's the car test and the diaper test.
The car test and the Carl test.
Yes. I was going to say like wait till Slate comes out with a diaper test plugin. Steven, if you're listening, let's chat.
VS Snappies.
God.
Yeah. No, it's good. Yeah. I basically, if I listen back on my speakers and it feels good and like I don't notice anything like too much, like I have to keep in mind that some things I notice are my actual listening environment versus, maybe the mastering engineer has a more objective listening environment, but sometimes, but yeah, usually it's just, if it feels good, if I'm still like tapping my feet, not bobbing my head and stuff, then we're probably in a good place.
Yeah. Okay. So let's reel it back to mixing. So how do you know when the mix is done and ready for mastering?
Okay, so my lame-ass answer is probably the same as the master. Like if I'm like, okay, like immediately just like dancing to the mix or like, like bobbing my head, feeling really good. I mean, that doesn't mean it's necessarily finished, but like, it's sort of also a little bit like what you said about what it used to do for the mastering is you don't hear any problems. You keep listening back and like, cool, I'm good with all of that, all these transitions feel good. The vocal we don't lose the vocal anywhere. Okay, I guess like there's nothing else to do. And that's also like a point of the mix where you can go too far. Like if you start looking for problems and you start saying like, oh, now I'm going to like, now that I really like everything, let's add a saturator and see if we can get it to like poke more. You're probably doing the wrong thing because you're going to just lose the magic that you had.
And you're looking for patterns in the static.
Yes.
Looking for something to fix.
Yes. Yeah. Once you're like looking for something, then you're in the wrong ballpark. If you have to fix something, you know it.
Yeah.
And like often I will mess that up. Like if I am happy If I throw up a mix and it feels really good, I'm like, oh, let's see if we can get a little bit more depth. That's probably not going to happen.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, because it'll usually be something specific. You'll be like, oh, those, like I wish the pads were a little bit, would hug me more. Like it's usually something specific. If there's a specific thing, when it comes to like your example of depth, if it's just like, oh, I just want more depth, that's such such an ambiguous, fluffy kind of approach to it. But if it's like, oh no, like I feel like the guitars just feel too clean still. They're not dreamy enough yet. Then at least it's like a specific thing,
right,
with a specific goal,
yes.
as opposed to, I don't know, like the mix doesn't have enough depth.
Yeah,
that's where it gets.
Or
dangerous.
You're like thinking like maybe it does need a bit more compression. Let me try out the new Eric Valentine compressor, Unfairchild, and maybe this will just bring a little bit more magic out. No, don't do that,
Yep.
Ben. Stop it. Just because you own the plugin doesn't mean you have to use it.
Oh my God, there's so many plugins I own that I don't use. There's so many that I own that like I don't think I've ever
opened.
opened. Now, granted, like usually they came in like a bundle or something, but
yeah, I've opened like probably 3 of the kilohertz plugins from Slate. Like I use the VMR all the time, every mix. But the kilohertz stuff, like I've used, I found use in some of it, but like unless I'm looking for something specific, I'm not opening random plugins. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll do the same thing where it's like if I want to make something weird, usually it's like a pad or a sound effect, and I'm like, I want to. This isn't weird enough yet. Then I'll intentionally pull up something I don't know how to use, because then I'm more likely to stumble onto something by accident.
Right.
But okay, so go back mixing. So yeah, same kind of answer. Like listening to it and seeing if anything specific jumps out at you, not just kind of like vague.
Yeah.
Things. Now, do you mix with a limiter on, with any like mastering on, or do you like from the beginning, or like towards the end of the process, or when?
I used to change, but for the last like couple of years, it's been limiter on since the beginning, and that's also what I send my mastering engineer, because I don't usually limit so hard. Although the mix I finished the other day was pretty loud and had it on the whole time, and that's what it is. But usually I'm not hitting it. Usually I would say I'm usually averaging like minus 12 dB LUFS.
Okay.
And so it's not like slammed, but I am using the limiter, and like I found that my kick and bass glue, I usually use the Pro L2 as my limiter on the modern setting, which I really like. And I think that's even the default. But Matt Huber said that he loves that one also in a recent like Instagram thing, so I felt validated. But yeah, like I have the Pro L2 on from the beginning these days, and that's what I'm sending to offer mastering, because my kick and bass correlation is just totally tied to that at this point. And when I take it off, then I'm leaving the mastering engineer to sort of recreate the low end glue, and I don't like that, because then it doesn't always end up being what I want it to be. And I'm still giving enough headroom that the mastering engineer can get some more stuff out of it, but at least my bass and my kick are how I had it glued in the mix. So that's sort of where I'm at with that question. What about you, Carl?
Yeah. I usually have limiters. Like I usually have limiters on my kick bus, on my snare bus, on my bass bus, on my vocal bus, but I don't usually have it on my mix bus till I'm pretty close to the end. And I will turn it off before I send it off to mastering. But I'll turn off like the limiter part of any mastering and like mix bus stuff that I do, but I'll leave everything else on. Because I guess for me, like the glue usually is more from like either like tape saturation or some of the compressors in there, and not necessarily from the limiter itself. But I'm also like, I don't know, I guess I really try very hard to get the low end to feel good before it hits any limiting anyway. So that way it's just like, I know.
Yeah, it's just earlier in the chain.
Yeah, it's just more control earlier on. But then usually what ends up happening is I've gotten better at this, but usually what I'll end up doing is I'll get the mix feeling really good, really big and full, That's just like the kinds of stuff that I tend to work on is like big, wall of sound, massive stuff. And then I'll put the limiter on, and then I'll realize, wow, I got to bring like the instruments down a lot. And then I'll like my the way that I have this is getting in the weeds a bit, but like the way that I have my like sub mixes before it goes to my mix bus, I have all my like drums and percussion, all the basses, all the non-bass and percussion instruments, like all the guitars, synths, sound effects, whatever. Pianos and things, and then I have my vocals, and then I have my effects sends all going to like their own sub bus. That just makes it very easy if I need a moment where I want to make everything dry up like instantaneously for a little contrast moment. I can just do it in like one spot. Makes it really easy. But what I end up doing usually is that instrument, like the non-rhythm section instrument bus, I usually end up having to bring that down like 3 dB. Because like once everything's really pushing through the limiter, then it's like, okay, well now there's just like that wall, the whole big wall of sound is pushed up against the front pane of glass or the pane of glass at the front of the store. And I need to back off some of the things so that way the vocals, the rhythm section, like the big stuff that are higher priority in the styles of music that I work on, that they still stay in the front. And I think I've gotten better at it over the past couple of years, where now I don't have to do that as much because I am more familiar with what that sort of a mix, what I need to do to kind of like preemptively, compensate for that.
Yeah.
And I start to mix with those background parts a lot lower than I probably would have instinctively done, because I know what the mastering is going to actually do to it in the end. So I'm able to get it to sound really good and full and still very, very loud, but loud with a lot of clarity and a lot of, intentionality behind that loudness.
Why don't you leave the limiter on to begin with if you know what the limiter is going to do to the instruments?
Because I found in my experience when I've done that, it falls apart when I turn the limiter off. Whereas if I can get I can usually get my mixes to be at like -12, -11 without a limiter on it. So if I can do that and then put the limiter on and it like is controlled and it's like things are kind of shaped how I want them to be, then I can get the massiveness that I want to get without losing the clarity, without losing the transients and things. So I've just found that it to me, it almost like helps me to make sure that I'm using like the best ingredients, and not just like
smearing MSG at the end.
Yeah, I think that's yes. So, I was like, I don't know. I started that metaphor, and then I was like, I don't know how to finish this.
I see where you're going. Yeah, maybe I'm a little bit more in the MSG camp than you are, but that's fair enough.
Yeah, because some people like they don't do that. They don't want to put a limiter on it. They want to like wait till mastering. Yeah, and I think that also, I don't want to say it's harder to determine if it's done or not. I think it's just a different check mark or different checkpoint.
Yeah.
But
having the limiter on means that the artist hears the same mix that the mastering engineer gets, and I think there's like a good, like they know what's. They have a better, maybe they have like a better idea of what's going to come in the final stage with the mastering if they hear the mix as it's limited and how it's going to be sent to the mastering engineer, or at least the mixing engineer has more of that confidence, at least. I don't know. Yeah. Different people do it. Different people skin it different ways. Like I think Matt Huber was saying also, like how he just like delivers it with the limiter how he had it, and then that's it. And I think that's also what's his name does that. The big mixer guy that I'm blanking on his name because it's 5:00, which is not late enough that I should forget his name. But Serban, there we are. Yeah, I think that's what he does too. But yeah.
And I think for myself, like I usually send 2 versions. I'll send it like with my limiter on it,
right,
and one without. So that way, it's like here you can hear what the artist has been hearing, but if you want a little bit more control, here's a version with everything else except for the limiter.
Right.
So then, if you could beat it, sweet. And if you want to work with mine and kind of go from there, then
also,
sweet. There's no wrong answer.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a good approach.
Yeah. So to tell that it's done, feels good. Nothing distracting. Nothing feels way out of balance.
Yeah, and you're grooving along to it, and you know, there's the visceral thing that you just can't like quite like. If you're intellectualizing it only, you're probably not there yet. If you're swaying, if there's something happening with your body, then that's a sign that your mix might be finished.
Yeah.
So should we move it back even further in time to
production?
How do we know the production is finished?
I have my thoughts.
I want you to start because I don't know. I haven't thought this out yet.
Okay. So for me, it's when I can listen through and nothing distracts me from the story. That's how I know it's the production's done. Because I don't really care. I think I've spent a lot of time not caring about the mix of the production. If that makes sense. Like I think that's like a learned skill or a developed skill of being able to separate your mixing mind from your production mind, or your mixing mind from like your songwriting mind, and to be able to listen to the production and not be distracted by the fact that the tambourine is way too loud, or the tambourine is way too quiet, or that one vocal phrase is louder than the rest, or that one note's, that one word is a little too quiet, whatever that is. You can't hear the T at the end of don't. Or donut, I don't know. Whatever word they're singing. I don't know why they would be
obviously they're singing about donuts. Yeah, come on.
Yeah, there should be more songs about donuts.
There should be more. There
not nearly enough. But I think for me, it's like I'm still in producer brain. I'm in storytelling brain, and I'm in like listener brain. And when I can listen to the song, and I'm able to follow along, and there's like a clear path that the listener should be kind of following along, they're like, you're kind of guiding them through the story of the song itself, and like the emotional ebbs and flows of the story. If I can listen to that and nothing is distracting me from that, nothing's kind of breaking the fourth wall, like a drum fill that happens at the same time as like a really important vocal take, or reverb tails that are like trailing off from a synth patch that are happening where everything else should be silent, and it should be a little intimate moment for the vocals. Like as long as there's nothing like that is pulling me out of the moment, then it's ready. Nice. And sometimes it's not a matter of too many things happening and that pulls you out. Sometimes it could be like, oh, I just feel like something's missing. I feel like there's something missing here, and I may not know what that is, but it still doesn't feel right. Like it feels like there should be something that I'm supposed to pay attention to here, but there's not. Like I think a lot of times this happens in like a verse where there's like a vocal phrase, and then there's like maybe like the vocal phrase is like 2 measures long, and then like there's 2 measures that finish out the chord progression where there's no vocals, and then it's almost kind of like a call and response, but there's no response. Like that's something that I hear happening a lot in productions. It's like, okay, I feel like something needs to happen there. Like as a listener, like I want something to support the lyrics, or like, interact with the story happening. And then it's not a quest of removing stuff. It's a quest of finding the right thing to add, to give the right amount of, excitement, or to like keep the momentum going.
Yes.
But it's those things. It doesn't. No moment along feels like it's pulling away from the story, and no part of the story feels unsupported. And when I
really like that. That's a great way.
When that happens, then I know, okay, production's done. It's ready for mixing.
Yes, I definitely agree with you about the support. Like every moment of the song has to be supported, and like sometimes you want more support, sometimes you want less support. And so sometimes you're wearing boxers, and sometimes you're wearing briefs. You know what I mean? Like okay, cut that, Gavi, cut it.
No, don't cut that, Gavi. Do not cut that. That is staying in.
I would have been cool with it, but your face made me feel like, oh shit, I shouldn't have said that.
No. I really want you to elaborate.
No. Just like, support, like supporting the song. Like, there are moments in the song where you want things to be pretty empty, and you want it to be sparse, just like a vocal and maybe one instrument. And there's parts of the song where you want it to fill up and to really feel full. And like, so sometimes at the end of a production, you're like, let's add a tambourine because we need one more thing for that last chorus to make it feel a little bit more special. people know it's the last chorus and like we're at the peak of the song. And so you add that tambourine. And then like I literally just finished a song where I was like, no, maybe I should add a tambourine. I was like, no, it doesn't need a tambourine because everything is fully supported. We're there.
Yep.
Like adding a tambourine will just be a waste of my time and it will distract and like we're good. Like it feels good. It feels supported. I love the way you said supported. I never thought that word before, but that's exactly what it is. And so that's kind of how you know your production is done. Like every spot of the song has a fitting outfit or whatever.
It has a purpose. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. So cool. So I guess purpose, intent for the production, feel good, no red flags for the mix, feel good, no red flags for the master.
Yeah. Well, I think, and I'm glad that we went into a couple specifics though, because I feel like when it feels good is like such common advice that like doesn't fucking mean anything.
I know. You know, it's hard though, because like when you're like a decade into this, it's very different than when you're like a year into this. Because like feel good a decade into it is like, oh, it just feels good because you've done so many. But a year into this, you have to know the specifics. You're right. And it's hard to know that. And but that's just like it comes with time. And then eventually it just feels good.
Yeah.
It's like do we want to go earlier in the chain? Do you want to do recording or editing? Editing is technically later in the process.
Yeah, let's go. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so how do we know an edit is done? I don't know. I often will edit things during the mixing stage because then something might become apparent. Like you might hear that the bass is not hitting with the kick at the same time in the mixing stage because there's no longer masking happening.
Mm-hmm. So
that might happen. Like a slight tweak might happen in the mixing stage. But if you're talking about like vocal edits, like tuning.
Well, I was going to say like let's think of the edits. Like you said, edits can sometimes rear their ugly heads in the mix, right? It could be much later in the process. So let's look at editing less as a chronological part of chronological part in the overall process and more of just like, regardless of where the edits happen, when you're doing an edit, how do you determine when that edit like fixed the problem, air quotes.
Yeah. And then I think it's back to the same thing. If like you listen back and you don't notice anything, then I don't know. I don't have a better answer than that. It's like nothing bothers you. Like, oh, this is cool,
So,
but you have to be careful with edits because edits you can go too far. Like you can overtune something, and you can lose the soul of the thing by over chopping it or over tuning it. So, kind of like it's a very very tender, delicate process, but it's still like the end result is like I don't notice any problems, but like you could have left something a little bit out of tune because there was more emotion there, or you could have like left it more in tune because that's the way the singer sings and like they like just they run into the note, they like slide into the note, and that's part of what it has to be,
Yeah, but that's the problem that you notice. Like it could be a like mathematically proper edit. It could be like on the grid, but if you notice that it feels stiff, that you're still noticing that, and that then it's not done. Right. or you got rid of that scoop, and maybe you don't notice it, and the artist notices it. Maybe the artist notices what you did to the vocals before you do. So it's not necessarily that you always get the only deciding vote on whether it's done or not.
Right. That definitely happens.
Yeah.
And often, and that's something that also will often happen in the mix once things are starting to clarify and be more apparent. So the artist may have been cool with the way the harmonies were tuned, but then they might find something like, oh, in the second chorus, there was that high harmony, and I think it's a little bit out of tune, and like nobody noticed it until that moment.
Yeah, I think that especially happens in backing vocals.
Yeah,
because they're always so buried, or like there's so much temporary reverb in the demo version, especially when people record at home.
And also when you first record it, it's so special and magical that there's harmonies that like you don't notice that there are problems with it. And you're like back in like the 60s, like, CSNY tracking vocals and like, who cares? But then with modern mixing and productions, you gotta
when this, you're zooming in because everything's, you're able to get a much more high fidelity output.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the age we live in.
Yeah, I think and I think the answer as far as like how do I know? I think it again goes back to I feel like for myself, the answer keeps on coming back to listening casually.
Mm.
Because I feel like as critical listeners, as the critical listeners that we are, like we have a hard time listening casually. And I think when we're able to force ourselves to do that, then when we do notice something weird, like we're going to notice weird stuff, but we're not going to be looking for it. It's going to grab our attention. And I think that's the way to figure out if the edit's done, the way to figure out if the production's done, the way to figure out if the mix is done. And maybe done's the wrong word, but like ready to move on.
Yeah, it's kind of like the way you would listen to another band that you didn't record. If you listen to a record of an artist you like and you're just excited to listen to the record, you're hyper-analyzing maybe the production, but you're not hyper-analyzing, like, was it really tuned tight enough? Was the bass really fat enough? Like, you're not listening like that. You're just happy to hear something musical, and that first listen of like a record that you just want to listen to is almost always great because you're not looking for those problems because you're not in that mixing mindset or that editing mindset. And so I feel like there's something there of like, can you step out of that role when you're doing your actual production mix, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And like doing dishes and listening to the mix you did at night and on earbuds is like a great way to do that.
Yeah. So last step being maybe the first step of the tracking process. We're not going to keep on going back all the way to
the songwriting process,
like songwriting part. We'll stick with like
what we know.
Yeah. But so with, recording takes, how do we know when we have a good take? Or how do we know that when we have enough takes that we could piece together?
I'm not into that. I'm not into that. I'm too much of a control freak. And there's no number that will say, like, I've done vocal sessions for people who say, just get me 4 good takes and then we'll patch it together. I can't work like that. I cannot work like that. And maybe you're different, but I'm with a vocalist in the studio and we're doing takes until I have a comp that I'm happy with. And I'm comping as I go. And then we might listen back to everything afterwards and say, like, let's fix a couple more spots. That often happens. But then we have a comp that we're happy with. And then, like, I don't have to go in there and look for takes. I know that the vocal is as good as it's going to get. Because also I know the limits of my singers, right? I also know like not every singer is going to get to 100, right? When you're getting to them their 100, then you move on, Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. It's like I feel like you're. Two things I want to prod you about. It was number one, how do you determine when you're happy with a comp? But also, how do you? This is a conversation for a different episode, I think. But like, how do we help the singers or the musicians, whoever they are, to go beyond their 100?
Ooh,
right. So let's save that one for another episode.
I like that.
But let's stick to what do you listen for when you feel like the comp is good?
I want to hear. First of all, I'm listening to the tonality of the voice. What is it consistent? And is it like the best kind of tonality from that singer? Because sometimes, they might have like a brighter version or a throatier version or whatever, and you want to know that the version of their voice is most appropriate for the song and that it's consistent across the comp. And sometimes you might have a word that's a little bit different, but does it match the part before it and after it well? So like it's really like time based. Like as you're moving through the story of the song, does the vocal make sense or does it sound chopped? And you can usually hear it. And I think I have a fine ear for that, but I think often the singer will tell you. I don't know if this happened when you were tracking vocals, but like if I'm not sure if it's a good enough thing, like let's be honest. Okay, so there are singers where you're not 100% happy, but you're limited. You can't get them past a certain threshold. And then what I'll do is I'll ask them, "What do you think?" And they'll tell you if they're happy with it or not. Like, yeah, I think it's good. Great, we're good. Because like if it was me, I would try again. but they might want to try again. They might not want to try again. And I don't want to waste their time if they're not going to actually get much better. So I find out if they're happy with it while we're working. I don't know if this is blasphemy. I don't know, but this is just the real world, people. This is not like, I'm not recording, these massive groups, or I'm not recording Adele. Okay, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So, in the real world, these are real moments. But we're always working through time. We're always going, section to section. Every transition from one spot to the next is being analyzed as we listen through.
So, do you ever like, if you're going section by section, you're comping as you go, like, do you have the attitude of, okay, we did this part, we approved it, let's move on, we're not going to come back to that? Or do you have it like, okay, we got this, we're feeling pretty good about it, let's move on, and then come back at the end and like do a full context, start to finish song to listen to it and see if we still feel good about it?
Yeah, we do that. Yeah. Usually we do that. If there's time, which hopefully there is, we usually do that. And then there's usually another couple spots to patch up.
Yeah. So then it's like, so what you're describing is kind of like almost like stage one, it's done. Or like, okay, we're feeling pretty good about this. We think this is
let's make sure
to be. And then it's like, okay, we're going to move on to the next parts. And then there's still that like final inspection.
Yeah. There is, for better or worse. For better or worse. Because also sometimes by the time you finish a song, the singer is super warmed up. And then that first verse, by the way, I don't always work linearly. Like sometimes we start with choruses, but like oftentimes we'll finish the whole song. The singer's more warmed up. We'll listen to the first verse and realize, oh shit, we could do this better now. Yeah. And then we do. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's something that, to kind of like tie this whole thing up and go back from, tracking through editing, through production, through mixing, through mastering. I think it's also very important that not only are we making these decisions, try to be as detached from it subjectively as we can, but also that we're listening to the whole thing in context. If we're doing a comp, we're listening to like the entirety of that section. If we're doing the production, we're listening to the entirety of the song. The mix, the entirety of the song. Like not just like looping a chorus until the chorus feels really good.
Yes.
The chorus mix feels right.
Yeah.
It's
and
like,
not just like comparing the master and the mix on only a spectro, whatever,
Yeah. Like listening to 3 seconds of one, then flipping to the other one for 3 seconds.
Just to hear the difference. That doesn't actually help you. Listen to the master and make sure that it feels good overall before you dissect it,
Yeah. Okay.
Cool.
So that was a longer episode than I think either of us had planned for, but I think that was good.
It was a good episode, and I think it was very thorough.
Yeah.
In the words of the Big Lebowski, he's a good man and thorough.
Yes. Also, nice marmot.
Marbit.
Nice marmot.
Marmot? Am I missing something? Marmite?
Oh.
Like the spread?
No, like that's a line from Big Lebowski.
You know what? Fuck, I need to rewatch it. It's been too long. I thought if you went for a rug quote, I would have been there with you. But you lost me with marmot.
I lost you with marmot. Maybe that should be the episode title.
Is it a ferret or a marmot?
Well, I think it is. I think it is a ferret, and it just says "nice marmot." I don't know. That's
sick.
Okay,
we all owe ourselves another watch of the Big Lebowski. So you deserve it. Go watch the Big Lebowski tonight. You have permission from Ben and Carl.
Yes, it's not. No, you don't have permission. It is an assignment.
Did you understand the assignment?
All right. Bye, Ben.
Bye, Carl.